Sup nerds? So I've recently done a survey asking people who their favourite and least favourite doctors are. This took way longer than I expected it to. So I just thought it'd be a cool little thing to do, and maybe I'd get 100 people responding and I'd release the results on Twitter, but it got over 700 responses, and so I'm doing whatever the fuck this is. It took me like 8 hours to compile it all together, and so I hope it's fucking interesting. So you may be asking yourself, why? Well, there's 4 main reasons. I wanted to know if your age influences your favourite doctor and your least favourite doctor, and if so, how? If a doctor is the one that you grew up with, the one that you started watching, does it influence your favourite doctor? Is there a link between doctors people like and the ones they dislike? And 4, I don't have any friends. Now there are some important notices I want to give before we dive into the results. Please don't take these results too seriously. I wasn't trying to find out who the best doctor is or the worst doctor is. If your doctor proves unpopular, it just means that you have a special connection with them that no one else is going to be able to experience, and that's pretty fucking swag. Next, the results are going to be skewed. I did this poll mostly on Twitter. A lot of people who responded were in their sort of late teens, early 20s, so you're going to get more of that opinion amplified when we go through the overall results. Obviously when we go through the results by age group, then it's going to be slightly different. Also, like I said, most people who responded were on Twitter, so the results are going to be skewed because, well, it's Twitter. Lastly, just thank you to all who responded. Thanks especially to the people who retweeted this, whose usernames are going to be here. Also thank you to my boyfriend Jay, who rang his parents up in order to get them to complete this survey. You're a wanker. Oh, this doesn't make any sense. So now we come to the questions of the survey. To be honest, I didn't really think too hard about these when I was writing them. All I wanted was to keep it simple, make sure I had some clear data that I could get some fun information out of afterwards. First question was, how old are you? Which is pretty self-explanatory. I could have saved myself a lot of effort by asking people to submit their age range rather than like free typing it into a text box, but I wouldn't have been able to change the age ranges around when it came to compiling the results, so it's probably a good thing. Next question on the survey was, do you consider yourself a Doctor Who fan? Now, I added this at the last minute and then didn't actually end up using it for any of the results for one very simple reason. Out of the 725 people that responded to the survey, only 7 of them said no, so I didn't get any good information out of that. So the next question was, who was the current Doctor when you started watching Doctor Who? Now, a lot of people were confused about this question because they wondered if it was what was the first Doctor you started watching, or what era did you start watching this show in. Basically what I meant was, who was the Doctor when you started watching? Even if you started watching like 3 Doctors before then, who was the Doctor when you started watching? I wanted to see what era people generally started watching in based on their age and see if that influenced their favourite Doctor later on, so that's why that question was asked in that particular way. The next question was the big one. Who is your favourite Doctor? A lot of people were annoyed that I only let people pick one answer. People wanted me to do either top 3 Doctors or pick one from the classic era and pick one from the new era. While I think it would have been interesting to do that, I think it would have made it harder to sort the results later on. I might come back to that classic Doctors, new Doctors idea because it seems interesting to see if there would be a link between the two. I don't look sweaty, do I?
No.
I feel sweaty. The final question was, who is your least favourite Doctor? Now, this was the only question that wasn't required to fill out because it felt weird to make people pick a least favourite Doctor. And I thought I would get more interesting results if the people that replied were the ones that really had an opinion that, you know, would want to reply. I also thought it would be interesting to see if there was any link between the kinds of people that wouldn't want to answer that question. So now we come to the bit you've all been waiting for. The resluts! Wait, what? So we're going to go through the overall results first, and then we'll break it down by age group and so on. So the first thing I wanted to go through was the ages of the participants. So as you can see on the graph, we got a lot of results from people in their sort of late teens, early 20s, but we did get some old... So the age range we got was between 13 and 66. So we got people whose first Doctor was a woman, and also whose first Doctor was William Hartnell. So the first result was, who was the current Doctor when you first started watching Doctor Who? Now, as you can see, we got a lot of results for Christopher Eccleston, which makes sense. Most of the people were late teens, early 20s answering this. They were going to be people who grew up with the revival, and that meant Christopher Eccleston. The next two results aren't too surprising, Matt Smith and David Tennant. What was surprising to me is that Jodie Whittaker came up on top of Peter Capaldi, so more people started watching during Whittaker's era than during Capaldi's era. The next after that was Paul McGann, which also makes sense since he was technically the longest running Doctor. We even got a couple people who started in the Patrick Troughton, William Hartnell era, which is really, really cool. So the next result was people's favourite Doctor the one that they also first started watching? And the answer was kind of. It came up 15%, which might seem a little bit low, but also there is 13 Doctors, so if you take there's a 1 in 13 chance, that's almost double. So we might be able to say that there is some influence, but it's definitely not a clear-cut thing. Okay, so now we're going to go into the least favourite Doctors overall. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I want it to be like a fun, light-hearted video, and I don't want to dwell too much on negatives. So, as most people were probably expecting, Jodie Whittaker came up top by quite a significant margin. What I wasn't expecting is Matt Smith coming up second, so I've never really heard that much Matt Smith hate. David Tennant and Colin Baker is probably understandable, they are quite divisive. The least unpopular were Patrick Troughton, Christopher Eccleston and Paul McGann, which makes sense because they are quite likeable Doctors. So now we come to the big answer. Who came up top? Who was the most favourite Doctor? And the one that came out top was Peter Capaldi, which I really wasn't expecting, and when I did a poll on Twitter the other day, they were all expecting it to be David Tennant as well. It might have something to do with the general age of the participants, but obviously we're going to break that down later. What is really interesting is that after Peter Capaldi, the next three on the list, David Tennant, Matt Smith and Jodie Whittaker, were all also voted as the top 3 least favourite Doctors. So it seems to me that the most popular Doctors are also going to be the most divisive ones. It's a bit of a shock to me how low Tom Baker is on the list, considering... Yeah. No, I'm talking to the camera, bro. Oh. So it's interesting to me how low Tom Baker came up on the list, considering that he's usually touted as one of the most popular Doctors. Again, might also have something to do with the age of the participants. The least likely to be someone's favourites are Peter Davison, Colin Baker and William Hartnell, which kind of makes sense, they're kind of like the edgy picks for someone's favourite Doctor. So anyway, that's it for the overall results. Now we can break it down by age. I'm going to try and whiz through this because otherwise we're going to be here forever. I'm going to put the full results down in the description so you can have a look at them if you want. Under 18, their favourite Doctors were Peter Capaldi, Matt Smith, David Tennant, Jodie Whittaker. That all makes sense just because of that's the age people would have grown up with if they were under 18. So their favourite classic Doctor was John Pertwee, which was a bit of a strange pick, but I'm fine with it. The least favourites were Colin Baker and Tom Baker, who came bottom of the list. Most of them started watching during the Jodie Whittaker era, which also makes sense if they're under 18. Matt Smith, Peter Capaldi coming next on the list. They had quite a high likelihood of liking their first Doctor, with about 20%. Their least favourites were Jodie Whittaker, Matt Smith, and Colin Baker at third. Their least favourite to dislike were Capaldi and Eccleston, as well as Sylvester McCoy, who no one said that they disliked. Next we move on to the 18 to 20s, who overwhelmingly chose Peter Capaldi as their favourite Doctor. David Tennant coming in second, but tied with Matt Smith. Their favourite classic Doctor was Paul McGann, and they were least likely to like Peter Davison, William Hartnell or Tom Baker. Again, really interesting to see Tom Baker so low in this list, considering that he's always pitted as one of the best Doctors. So, their first Doctors. You can see David Tennant Matt Smith and Christopher Eccleston, that all makes sense. One person put Peter Davison, which isn't possible because they would have been about minus 20 years old. 18% had the same first Doctor and favourite Doctor, which is higher than the average was, but not as high as the under 18s were. The least favourite Doctors were Jodie Whittaker, again, I'm going to be saying that a lot this video. Matt Smith up next, and David Tennant. They were least likely to hate Christopher Eccleston, Tom Baker and Paul McGann. We're seeing the same ones over and over again, basically. So now we move on to 21 to 24 age range, which is my age range. Peter Capaldi... Stop laughing! As you can see, Peter Capaldi came up top, next by David Tennant, who was much closer at being top spot than previous age groups, but still didn't manage to get there. Matt Smith and Jodie Whittaker coming next. This all makes sense so far. And their least likely to be their favourites are Hartnell and the Bakers, which is also the name of my indie folk band. Majority of them said that Christopher Eccleston was their first Doctor, then Matt Smith, then David Tennant. I would have thought it would be the other way around, but... 13% of them had the same first Doctor and favourite Doctor, so it's less than an average. Least favourite Doctors were Jodie Whittaker again, this time by quite a considerable margin, David Tennant coming up second, and then Peter Davison coming up third. Patrick Troughton, Sylvester McCoy and John Pertwee were the least likely to be disliked by this age group. So now we move on to the 25 to 29 age group. It's a bit of a weird age to be a Doctor Who fan, because when they were born there wasn't Doctor Who on TV. Their favourites were Peter Capaldi and David Tennant again, but we got Christopher Eccleston in the top 3 for the first time. And this makes sense to me because obviously these are the age group of people who would have been kids when the revival happened. Their favourite classic Doctor was John Pertwee, and they were least likely to like William Hartnell, Patrick Troughton or Colin Baker, who was no one's favourite. Overwhelming amount of people saying that they had Christopher Eccleston as their first Doctor, which again makes sense. David Tennant, Matt Smith coming next. 15%, so bang on average, had the same first Doctor as their favourite Doctor. Their least favourites again were Jodie Whittaker by not such a great margin this time, second being Colin Baker and Matt Smith. They were least likely to dislike Paul McGann, Christopher Eccleston and Sylvester McCoy. So now we move on to the 30 to 39 age group. You'll notice this is a bit of a bigger age group. This is because I didn't get many results from here on, so I had to make the age groups bigger in order to get the results up. As you can see, Peter Capaldi and David Tennant still came up top, with Sylvester McCoy as third. Eccleston, Hartnell and Troughton all came up bottom for least likely to be someone's favourite, as well as also again Colin Baker, who no one liked. They mostly started in the Christopher Eccleston era, with some of them starting in the Paul McGann era. 9% had the same first Doctor as favourite Doctor, so very low result for that. Least favourites again, Jodie Whittaker and David Tennant. I'm getting fed up of saying Jodie Whittaker and David Tennant, with Colin Baker coming in third. Patrick Troughton, Sylvester McCoy and John Pertwee were least likely to be their least favourites. I think the reason why people don't have very strong opinions about the Hartnell and Troughton eras is because they are so difficult to get into. I mean, there's a lot of episodes missing and they're all in black and white, and some of them are very, very, very slow. I guess it is a bit of a shame because there's a lot of good stuff in those eras, as there is in all eras. Right, now we go on to the 40 to 49 age range. With the biggest shock of all, Jodie Whittaker came up as their favourite Doctor. I mean, I can't begin to understand how this happened, but I mean, I'm all for it. The next two are Capaldi and Tennant, which, let's be honest, at this point, none of us are surprised by. Followed by Sylvester McCoy as their favourite classic Doctor, with Colin Baker, Patrick Troughton and Paul McGann all coming bottom of the list. Most of them started to watch in the Tom Baker, Sylvester McCoy eras. So this is the first time we've had like a proper switch between revival and classic Who. The other thing that's really cool for me is that we even got some people who started watching in the Jodie Whittaker era. It's never too late to be a Doctor Who fan. Only 11% had the same Doctor as their favourite, who was their first Doctor. And now we move on to their least favourites. Matt Smith came up top of the list as their least favourite Doctor, tied with Jodie Whittaker, who was also their favourite Doctor. I did check, no one put Jodie Whittaker for both. We also got Paul McGann on 3rd place here, which is strange considering he's not been anywhere near the top of least favourite Doctors for the other age ranges, which I guess makes sense because if you grew up in the McCoy era, you probably would have been disappointed by the 1996 movie. And they were least likely to dislike Christopher Eccleston and Patrick Troughton, who none of them said was their least favourite. Now the final age group, 50 plus. So what do the wise elders of the Doctor Who community say? Well, their favourite was very overwhelmingly Tom Baker. So there's a very clear generational divide between opinion on Tom Baker. Like I was saying before, I was surprised that Tom Baker scored so low in the other age groups, but he scored so high in this one. Next was Peter Capaldi, so maybe 50 plus Doctor Who fans like a Doctor who's also 50 plus. They were least likely to vote for Hartnell, Peter Davison and Colin Baker, who do not appear on this list. But remember, this age group did not have a lot of responses, so take it with a grain of salt. So they were more likely to grow up in the Tom Baker and John Pertwee eras, which makes sense for the age range. So I think I can say with some certainty that your age does correlate with the Doctor you first stopped watching, which seemed like an obvious thing, but I needed to make sure it was true. 23% of them had the same Doctor for their first Doctor and favourite Doctor, most of which was Tom Baker. And their least favourite was Colin Baker, for a change. So it seems like disliking Doctors is also a generational thing. It's very interesting to me that all the other age groups had very similar results, but this age group has completely different results. Sylvester McCoy was second, tied with Jodie Whittaker. Troughton, Pertwee and Matt Smith all got 0 votes for least favourite Doctor in this age range, but again it was a small sample size, so you gotta take it. So that concludes the rundown of age groups. So I think there is some sort of link between the age groups and their Doctor Who opinions, but definitely not as much as I was thinking there would be. There was some differences that were very noticeable, but they were all like explainable by, yeah, well, this age group would have grown up in this time, or they would have been aware of Doctor Who at this specific point. But at the end of the day, there's fans of all Doctors amongst all age groups. So now, there's a little bit of a bonus. I thought it'd be fun to order all the results by people's favourite Doctor, so that we can make some sort of little character profile of each of the Doctor's fans. So now it's time for, what does your favourite Doctor say about you? According to this very unscientific survey. First of all, William Hartnell fans. The average age of the William Hartnell fan was 23. Most common first Doctor was Christopher Eccleston. Their least favourite Doctor was Matt Smith, and they were very unlikely to have them as their first Doctor. Patrick Troughton fans. The average age was 26. Most common first Doctor, Christopher Eccleston. Least favourite Doctor, Jodie Whittaker, and they were very, very unlikely to have them as their first Doctor. John Pertwee fans. Average age was 27. The most common first Doctor, again, was Christopher Eccleston. Again, Jodie Whittaker's least favourite. They were sort of unlikely to have them as their first Doctor, but a couple of them did. The average Tom Baker fan is 40 years old. Most common first Doctor was Tom Baker, and their most common least favourite was Jodie Whittaker. They were fairly likely to have them as his first Doctor, from 22%. Peter Davison fans, the average age was 27. Most common first Doctor was Christopher Eccleston. Least favourite Doctor was not to answer. But if you pushed them, they would say Whittaker. They were unlikely to have them as their first Doctor. Colin Baker fans, 22 was the average age. Their most common first Doctor was Matt Smith. Least favourite Doctor, again, Jodie Whittaker, and none of them had him as his first Doctor. Sylvester McCoy fans, the average age was 28. Most common first Doctor was David Tennant. Least favourite Doctor was Matt Smith, and they're not very likely to have them as his first Doctor. Paul McGann fans, average age 23. Most common first Doctor, Matt Smith. Also, most common answer was not to answer for the least favourite Doctor, but again, Jodie Whittaker was the second favourite, or least favourite. Not very likely to have him as your first Doctor, with only 9% of them having him as their first Doctor. Christopher Eccleston fans, the average age was 23. Most common first Doctor, Christopher Eccleston. Least favourite doctor, again Jodie Whittaker, but likely to have him as your first doctor, 32%. David Tennant fans, average age was 24, most common first doctor again was Christopher Eccleston, least favourite doctor was Jodie Whittaker, likely to have him as your first doctor, about 25%. Matt Smith fans, average age was 23, most common first doctor was also Matt Smith, and they didn't want to answer least favourite doctor on average, but also Jodie Whittaker was the second. You're quite likely to have him as your first doctor if he's your favourite, with about 29%. Peter Capaldi fans, average age 23, most common first doctor was Matt Smith, least favourite doctor again was not to give an answer, but Jodie Whittaker was second. Not very likely to have him as your first doctor, it was only about 8%. And finally, Jodie Whittaker fans, the average age was 25, most common first doctor was most common first doctor was Christopher Eccleston. Their least favourite doctor most likely won't answer, but if they were pushed, David Tennant. I would love to have been in a room with them at the end of Power of the Doctor. You're a little bit likely to have her as your first doctor with about 14%. Well, that was the results. Did you agree? What were your opinions? Do you think I could have done any better? Let me know. Are there any other ideas you want me to explore? Please also let me know, but maybe give me a little bit of time, because it took me fucking hours. I'll leave all the links in the description if you want to go over the data yourself. Now everyone needs to go and watch some Patrick Troughton, because clearly you guys haven't brushed up on your Patrick Troughton. Bye!